The portrait was discovered in 1887, buried beneath the floorboards of an abandoned cabin in Coldwater Creek, West Virginia. The photograph itself was unremarkable at first glance. A stern-faced father standing behind three sons, their expressions solemn as was customary for portraits of that era. The cabin had remained untouched for decades, preserved by the isolation of the mountains and the local superstitions that kept trespassers away. When land surveyors finally entered the property, they discovered the portrait wrapped in oilcloth, as if someone had deliberately hidden it from the world. It wasn't until the photograph was cleaned and examined in proper light that anyone noticed what was wrong with the youngest boy's face. His features were his own, yet somehow altered, stretched in ways that defied natural explanation. His eyes, tilted at impossible angles, seemed to look both at the camera and somewhere beyond it. His smile extended too far across his cheeks, revealing teeth that appeared to curve around the jawbone. The effect was subtle enough that a casual observer might dismiss it as damage to the photograph itself, but those who studied it longer could not escape the unnerving sensation that something had altered the child from within. The surveyors who found the portrait were not men given to superstition. They were educated professionals who had come to map the region for a railroad company intent on expanding into the resource-rich valleys of Appalachia. Yet none of them wished to keep the photograph overnight. They sealed it in an envelope and sent it to the company headquarters in Richmond, along with a brief note explaining its discovery but saying nothing of the disquiet it had stirred in them. Coldwater Creek had once been home to a small but prosperous community of miners, loggers, and farmers. The town began to empty in the winter of 1861, not because of the Civil War that had just erupted, but due to a series of disappearances that locals attributed to something living in the nearby caves. By 1863, only the Sullivan family remained, a widower named Ezekiel and his three sons. They vanished in the spring of that year, leaving their cabin undisturbed, as if they had simply walked out and never returned. Their disappearance might have remained just another mystery of the mountains, forgotten by all but local folklore, had it not been for the portrait that preserved their image and the disturbing anomaly of the youngest child's face. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. You need to subscribe because these forgotten stories from America's darkest corners will transform how you understand our shared history. Stories that were deliberately erased, now brought into the light through meticulous research. The portrait eventually found its way to Dr. Morris Finch, a physician with an interest in photographic analysis. Dr. Finch had earned a reputation for debunking supposed supernatural phenomena by identifying technical errors in their documentation. He approached the Sullivan family portrait with the same clinical detachment, confident that he would find evidence of double exposure, chemical damage, or deliberate manipulation. What he discovered instead was that the distortions in the boy's face could not be explained by any known photographic anomaly of the time. The features appear to have been altered while the photograph was being taken, he wrote in his notes from December 1887. It is as though the child's face was in motion, yet the exposure time would have required absolute stillness. More disturbing is the fact that only his features show this effect. His collar remains crisp, his hair clearly defined. Whatever caused this distortion affected only the flesh of his face. Dr. Finch's professional curiosity led him to investigate the history of the Sullivan family. County records showed that Ezekiel Sullivan had moved to Coldwater Creek in 1855 with his pregnant wife and two young sons. His wife died giving birth to their third child, the boy who would later appear distorted in the photograph. This youngest son, named Elijah, was described in church records as a child of unusual temperament, silent in demeanor, yet disruptive in presence. The pastor noted that during services, objects near the boy, hymnals, collection plates, even the candles on the altar, would occasionally move without being touched. These accounts might have been dismissed as superstitious exaggeration had Dr. Finch not discovered a letter written by Ezekiel Sullivan himself, addressed to his brother in Pennsylvania but never sent. The letter was found in the county records office, having been preserved as evidence when authorities investigated the family's disappearance. Elijah speaks to something we cannot see, Sullivan wrote. At first, Martha and I believed it to be the innocent imagination of a child, but he knows things he should not know. He told me about the cave before I ever mentioned it to him. He says they live inside the mountain, and they are teaching him how to change. I fear what he is becoming. I fear what they want from us." The letter ended abruptly, without signature or conclusion, as if Sullivan had been interrupted during its writing. No further correspondence from the family exists. Dr. Finch traveled to Coldwater Creek in early 1888, determined to examine the Sullivan cabin and the caves mentioned in Ezekiel's letter. He hired a local guide, a man who had lived in a neighboring valley and knew the region well. The guide was reluctant to approach the abandoned settlement, explaining that local hunters avoided the area entirely. "The animals won't go there," the guide told Finch. "Nothing lives in those woods anymore. Even the birds go silent when you get close to the old Sullivan place." Despite these warnings, Finch insisted on seeing the cabin and the surrounding area. They arrived at Coldwater Creek on a clear morning in March. The settlement consisted of 15 structures arranged around what had once been a small town square. The buildings stood intact, but showed signs of hasty abandonment. Doors left open, personal items scattered as if the occupants had fled in panic. The Sullivan cabin sat apart from the others, on a rise overlooking both the town and the mouth of a narrow valley that led deeper into the mountains. Unlike the other buildings, it had been closed and secured, its windows shuttered, its door locked from the outside with a heavy iron padlock that had not been manufactured in the region. Someone had intended to contain whatever was inside. Dr. Finch's investigation of the Sullivan cabin revealed disturbing evidence of the family's final days. The interior was largely untouched by time or weather, preserved by the dry mountain air and the tight construction of the cabin walls. A meal remained on the table, the food now reduced to dust. 3 small beds in the loft space were neatly made, while the larger bed on the main floor had been stripped of its blankets. Most telling was the back wall of the cabin, where Ezekiel Sullivan appeared to have been documenting his youngest son's transformation. Dozens of small portraits had been pinned to the wood in chronological order, each showing Elijah's face becoming progressively more distorted. The earliest images showed a normal child with solemn eyes. In each subsequent portrait, his features appeared subtly altered, his eyes growing more slanted, his mouth stretching wider, the proportions of his face shifting in ways that seemed both deliberate and impossible. The final image in the sequence was missing, apparently torn from the wall. In its place was a charcoal drawing, clearly made by an adult hand, depicting the entrance to a cave with a small figure standing at its mouth. The figure's proportions were childlike, but its limbs were drawn at angles that suggested they bent in additional places. Beneath the drawing, Sullivan had written a single sentence: "He goes to them every night now." The cave system that extended beneath Coldwater Creek had been well known to the early settlers. The indigenous people of the region had avoided it entirely, building no settlements within miles of its numerous entrances. When European colonists first arrived in the area, they found the caves lined with peculiar symbols carved into the rock, geometric patterns that didn't match the artistic traditions of any known tribe. Early missionaries interpreted these as pagan warnings and had them destroyed, unwittingly removing what might have been crucial information about what dwelled below. By 1855, when the Sullivan family arrived, local coal companies had begun preliminary surveys of the cave network, hoping to find new mineral deposits. Their expeditions reported unusual acoustic properties within the deeper chambers, sounds that seemed to travel in impossible directions, voices that echoed before words were spoken. Several surveyors refused to return after their initial descent, claiming they had heard something moving through passages that should have been empty. The mining company abandoned its interest in the caves by 1857, citing structural instabilities that made extraction too dangerous. Their official records made no mention of unusual phenomena, but personal journals kept by the lead engineer described a sensation of being observed by something that understands us better than we understand ourselves. This historical context provided Dr. E. Finch with a framework for understanding Ezekiel Sullivan's growing fear of his son's connection to whatever lived beneath the mountain. The father's desperate attempts to document the physical changes in his child suggested he was seeking evidence, proof of something he feared would not be believed. What ultimately happened to the Sullivan family remained unclear to Dr. Finch until he discovered a hidden compartment beneath the cabin's hearth. Inside was a journal kept by Ezekiel, its final entry dated April 3, 1863. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the account progressed. Elijah did not come home tonight, Sullivan wrote. The other boys are frightened. They say they saw him walking toward the cave entrance at dusk, but his movements were wrong, like he had too many joints, like his bones had softened. I told them to stay inside while I searched for him. I followed his tracks to the cave mouth, but they changed as they approached the entrance. The footprints became longer, with unusual indentations, as if his feet were reshaping themselves with each step. The entry continued after an apparent break in writing. I heard Elijah's voice calling from inside the darkness. He said they want to meet his brothers. He said they want to show us how to change too. Something is moving in the shadows behind him. I cannot see it clearly, but it shifts like smoke given partial substance. Elijah's face is changing as I watch. His skin seems to ripple as if something moves beneath it. I am going back to get the boys. We will leave this place tonight. The journal ended there. Whatever Ezekiel Sullivan encountered in his final hours remained unrecorded. The family was never seen again by human eyes. Dr. Finch concluded his investigation by examining the cave entrance mentioned in Sullivan's writings. He found it partially collapsed, whether through natural causes or deliberate action he could not determine. The ground around the entrance was unnaturally barren. No plants grew within 20 feet of the opening, no insects moved among the rocks. Even in the bright spring sunlight, the darkness beyond the narrow gap seemed absolute, as if the cave consumed light rather than merely blocking it. Finch made no attempt to enter. His scientific curiosity was tempered by the growing conviction that some mysteries were not meant to be solved by direct observation. Instead, he collected soil samples from around the entrance, several of which contained unusual mineral compositions that could not be identified by the laboratories of the time. Before leaving Coldwater Creek, Finch made one final discovery that connected the Sullivan case to other incidents across Appalachia. In the town's small cemetery, he found a grave marker dated 1859, 2 years before the mass disappearance of the town's residents. The inscription read only, "Here lies Rebecca Holloway, who saw what they truly are." Local records indicated that Rebecca had been the school teacher, a young woman from Pennsylvania who had reported concerns about Elijah Sullivan's behavior shortly before her death. According to witness statements preserved in the county files, Rebecca had kept a journal documenting Elijah's increasingly strange actions and appearance. She claimed that shadows moved differently around the boy, that his reflection in windows sometimes moved independently of his body, and that other children complained of hearing voices after spending time near him. The journal was never found after her death, which was officially attributed to a fever, but described by one witness as a wasting from within, as if something had hollowed her out. The portrait of the Sullivan family resurfaced in 1912, discovered in the archives of the Richmond Historical Society, where it had been misfiled and forgotten. By this time, Dr. Finch had passed away, his research into the Coldwater Creek incident unpublished and largely unknown outside academic circles. The photograph came to the attention of Dr. Eleanor Barnett, one of the few female physicians of the era and a specialist in anatomical abnormalities. Her scientific interest was coupled with a personal connection to the region. Her grandfather had been among the original settlers of Coldwater Creek, though he had moved his family away in 1858, 3 years before the town's abandonment. Dr. E. Barnett recognized her grandfather's handwriting in some of the town records that accompanied the portrait. His notes described increasing tension among the residents regarding the Sullivan family, particularly the youngest son. "The child draws attention that none of us desire," he wrote. "Strangers have begun to visit the town, asking questions about the boy. They dress like ordinary travelers but speak oddly, using words that sound familiar but somehow wrong, as if they learned our language from books rather than people. They always find their way to the Sullivan cabin, though no one directs them there." These accounts aligned with what Dr. Barnett had heard from her mother, stories told in hushed tones about the Watchers who had come to Coldwater Creek in the final years of its existence. Her grandfather had moved the family specifically to escape their attention, believing that anyone who noticed Elijah Sullivan too closely would eventually be noticed in return. Dr. Barnett's professional examination of the photograph confirmed what Dr. Finch had observed decades earlier. The distortions in Elijah's face could not be explained by any known photographic process. Using more advanced techniques available in the early 20th century, she was able to enhance details that had been obscured in earlier analyses. Most significantly, she discovered that the distortion extended beyond the boy's facial features. His hands, partially visible at his sides, showed subtle elongation of the fingers and unusual joint structures that would have allowed movement in directions human hands cannot bend. The anatomical abnormality suggests not a deformity present from birth, but a progressive transformation of existing structures, she wrote in her notes. If the photographic evidence is accepted as accurate, the Sullivan child's skeletal and muscular systems were being fundamentally reordered by some unknown process. Dr. Barnett expanded the investigation beyond the Sullivan family, searching for similar cases across Appalachia. She discovered several incidents that followed a pattern. Isolated communities, children who displayed unusual behaviors and physical changes, and subsequent disappearances that were either never investigated or dismissed as families moving away without notice. In each case, proximity to cave systems was a common factor, as was the presence of unusual geometric symbols found carved into trees or rocks near the settlements. Do you ever catch yourself thinking about the secrets your own family might be hiding? Leave a comment with this sentence. Some family portraits hide more than just forced smiles. I need to know who among you understands the weight of hidden history. The most compelling connection emerged from a collection of folk songs documented by a musicologist traveling through West Virginia in the 1890s. Several ballads referenced the hollow children or those who change beneath the hill. One song, recorded from an elderly woman in a community 30 miles from Coldwater Creek, contained lyrics that directly paralleled the Sullivan case. Elijah's face, it stretched and grew. His eyes, they saw what no child knew. They called him from beneath the ground, where ancient things still move around. The woman claimed the song had been composed by her cousin, who had visited Coldwater Creek in 1862 and encountered Elijah Sullivan. The cousin described the boy as having a face that moved like water when he thought no one was watching. She returned from the visit with recurring nightmares about caves and died 3 months later of what the local doctor called nervous exhaustion. Dr. Barnett traveled to the remains of Coldwater Creek in the summer of 1912 to conduct her own field research. The site had been largely reclaimed by the forest, with only stone foundations marking where buildings had once stood. The Sullivan cabin, however, remained partially intact, protected by the superstitions that still kept locals away from the area. Inside, she found the wall of portraits that Dr. Finch had documented, now damaged by exposure, but still showing the progression of Elijah's transformation. What neither Finch nor previous visitors had discovered was a small chamber dug beneath the cabin floor, accessible through a trapdoor concealed under a heavy dresser. The space was lined with the same geometric symbols found near cave entrances throughout the region. Inside was a collection of objects arranged in a circular pattern: small animal bones, jars of unidentifiable substances, and stones with naturally occurring patterns that resembled written characters. At the center of this arrangement lay a final photograph of Elijah Sullivan, taken perhaps days before the family's disappearance. In this image, the boy's transformation had progressed far beyond what was visible in the family portrait. His face had elongated dramatically, the skin stretched taut over a skull that no longer appeared human in its proportions. His eyes had migrated toward the temples, and his mouth extended nearly to his ears. Most disturbing was the quality of awareness in his expression, not the vacant stare of a child posed for a photograph, but the focused intensity of something studying the photographer with calculated interest. Written on the back of the photograph, in what was presumably Ezekiel Sullivan's handwriting, was a message that Dr. Barnett would later reference as the most disturbing primary source I have encountered in my research. The text read, "This is no longer my son. When I asked what he has become, he said they have no word we can pronounce, but they have lived in the deep places of the world since before our kind walked upright. He says they have been watching us, learning from us, preparing. He says more children will be called. He says they see something valuable in our form, but need to correct its flaws. I am going to take the boys and leave tonight, though I fear it may already be too late." The implications of this message, that whatever had transformed Elijah was not merely a localized phenomenon, but part of a broader pattern of observation and selection, aligned with the scattered reports Dr. Barnett had uncovered across the region. The entities beneath the mountains appeared to be studying human beings, perhaps for purposes of mimicry or some form of biological adaptation that science of the era could not comprehend. Dr. Barnett's investigation was interrupted by the outbreak of World War I, which redirected her professional attention to treating wounded soldiers returning from Europe. She never published her findings on the Sullivan case, though her private papers contained extensive notes intended for a future monograph. These documents remained in her family's possession until 1967, when they were donated to the West Virginia State Archives. The Sullivan family portrait continued its strange journey through history, passing through various collections and occasionally attracting brief attention from researchers of unusual phenomena. The distortions in Elijah's face were variously attributed to genetic abnormalities, photographic errors, or deliberate manipulation by early practitioners of spirit photography. Few connected the image to the broader pattern of disappearances and transformations that had occurred throughout Appalachia during the mid-19th century. In 1972, Dr. Thomas Harlow, a geologist conducting a survey of cave systems in West Virginia, discovered a sealed chamber 300 feet below the entrance to what had once been known as Sullivan's Cave, near the abandoned settlement of Coldwater Creek. The chamber contained no human remains but held artifacts that appeared to have been arranged in a deliberate pattern. Personal items belonging to the Sullivan family, including pocket watches, wedding rings, and children's toys, positioned in a spiral configuration around a central space that was notably empty. Most significant among these items was a metal box containing daguerreotypes of local residents who had disappeared in 1861, before the Sullivan family's vanishing. Each image showed subtle distortions similar to those observed in Elijah Sullivan's portrait. Elongated features, eyes positioned at unusual angles, mouths stretched beyond normal human anatomy. These physical changes appeared most pronounced in children, but were visible to some degree in subjects of all ages. Dr. Harlow's discovery provided the first physical evidence that the phenomenon documented in the Sullivan case had affected others in the community. The arrangement of personal items suggested a ritual purpose that anthropologists consulted on the case could not connect to any known cultural practice, either indigenous or European. The spiral pattern, however, matched the geometric symbols previously documented near cave entrances throughout the region. Analysis of mineral deposits on the artifacts indicated they had been placed in the chamber between 1861 and 1863, corresponding exactly to the period when Coldwater Creek was abandoned and the Sullivan family disappeared. More puzzling was the complete absence of human remains. If the residents had died in the cave, some trace of their presence should have remained, yet the chamber contained only their possessions, arranged with deliberate precision. Dr. Harlow expanded his investigation to include soil samples from the chamber floor. These revealed trace elements not typically found in the region's geology, including isotopes of carbon and nitrogen that suggested biological activity of an unusual nature. Most significantly, the samples contained microscopic structures that resembled cellular material but did not match any known biological classification. These structures appeared to be dormant rather than dead, leading some researchers to speculate that they might represent an unknown life form capable of extended hibernation. The discovery prompted renewed interest in the Sullivan case and the broader pattern of disappearances throughout Appalachia. Researchers began cross-referencing historical records with geological surveys, identifying over 30 communities that had been abandoned under similar circumstances between 1840 and 1880. In each instance, settlements were located within 1 mile of a cave entrance. Residents had reported unusual behaviors among local children before the disappearances, and geometric symbols matching those found at Coldwater Creek were documented in the vicinity. The geographical distribution of these incidents formed a pattern that corresponded to the deeper cave systems of the region, those that extended hundreds of feet below the surface and connected to subterranean water sources. This suggested that whatever had influenced the Sullivan family and the other disappeared communities had originated deep within the mountain, following established cave networks to reach the surface. Dr. Harlow's research team made a final discovery that seemed to confirm this hypothesis. Using advanced mapping techniques, they identified a previously unknown chamber directly beneath where the Sullivan cabin had stood. This space was accessible only through a narrow vertical shaft that descended nearly 500 feet into the mountain, far deeper than any natural formation in the region should have extended. At the bottom of this shaft, they found a series of tunnels that did not match the geological patterns of natural cave formation. These passages appeared to have been created through some process that softened and reshaped the stone, rather than breaking or eroding it. The tunnels were lined with the now familiar geometric symbols, carved with greater precision and complexity than those found near the surface. They extended for miles in multiple directions, creating a network that connected all the sites where disappearances had been documented. Most disturbing was the evidence that this tunnel system predated European settlement of the region by centuries, possibly millennia, suggesting that whatever had affected the Sullivan family had been present in Appalachia long before human communities were established there. The implications of these findings were profound. If the evidence was interpreted correctly, it suggested that an unknown entity or group of entities had been observing human development from beneath the mountains, occasionally selecting individuals for some purpose that remained unclear. The physical transformations documented in Elijah Sullivan and others might represent attempts to create intermediaries between these entities and the human world, beings that could exist in both environments. In 1974, as Dr. Harlow prepared to publish his findings, the cave entrance at Coldwater Creek collapsed in what appeared to be a natural rock slide, though seismic data recorded no activity in the region at the time. The collapse sealed the vertical shaft leading to the deeper tunnel system, making further exploration impossible without major excavation. Permission for such excavation was denied by state authorities, citing safety concerns and the historical significance of the site. Dr. Harlow's research was published in a limited academic journal, but received little attention outside specialized circles. His samples from the sealed chamber were stored at West Virginia University, but were damaged in a laboratory fire in 1978, destroying most of the physical evidence that supported his more controversial claims. The Sullivan family portrait, however, had been carefully preserved and photographically reproduced. It remained the most compelling visual evidence of the transformation process that had affected the youngest son. In 1991, the portrait was acquired by the National Archive of Folk History, where it was included in a collection documenting Appalachian communities of the 19th century. The accompanying description made no mention of the distortions in Elijah's face or the strange circumstances of the family's disappearance. It was simply labeled as Family Portrait, Sullivan Household, Coldwater Creek, West Virginia, circa 1862. For most viewers, the subtle wrongness of the boy's features registered only as an unsettling impression, something glimpsed from the corner of the eye rather than directly observed. Those who noticed often attributed the effect to damage or poor preservation of the original daguerreotype. Few recognized what they were truly seeing: documentation of a human child in the process of becoming something else, captured in the moment of transition. The true significance of the Sullivan portrait, and its connection to whatever still moved through the deep tunnels beneath the mountains, remained known only to a handful of researchers who continued to investigate the pattern of disappearances across Appalachia. Their work suggested that the phenomenon had not ended with the 19th century incidents, but had simply become more selective, more careful to avoid detection. Reports of missing hikers and cave explorers continued throughout the 20th century, with several cases showing unusual patterns. Belongings would be found arranged in geometric configurations. Witnesses sometimes reported seeing the missing persons behaving strangely in the days before their disappearance, moving in ways that seemed unnatural or speaking in altered voices. In a few instances, photographs taken shortly before someone vanished showed subtle distortions in their features. Nothing as pronounced as Elijah Sullivan's transformation, but reminiscent of its early stages. In 2008, the original daguerreotype of the Sullivan family was temporarily transferred to the Smithsonian Institution for digital preservation using advanced imaging technology. This process revealed details that had not been visible to previous researchers, even under microscopic examination. The high-resolution scans showed that the distortion in Elijah Sullivan's face extended beyond the surface features. The underlying bone structure itself appeared to be in a state of flux, with the skull elongating and the jaw restructuring in ways that human physiology should not permit. More startling were the shadows captured in the background of the image. Enhanced and magnified, they revealed subtle shapes that did not correspond to any of the human figures or objects visible in the portrait. These shadows appeared to form partial outlines of something standing behind the family, something tall and angular, with proportions that did not match human anatomy. Whether this represented an actual presence or some artifact of the photographic process remained impossible to determine with certainty. The digital analysis also revealed text scratched into the back of the daguerreotype plate, visible only under specific light conditions. The message, presumably added by Ezekiel Sullivan himself, read, "They are patient beyond human understanding. They have watched us for thousands of years. They say we are nearly ready." This discovery coincided with renewed interest in the Appalachian disappearances among a generation of researchers with access to computational tools unavailable to their predecessors. Geographic information systems allowed them to map the pattern of incidents with greater precision, revealing statistical anomalies that had previously gone unnoticed. The disappearances had not been random, but followed distinct temporal and spatial patterns, clusters of incidents separated by periods of inactivity, with each cluster moving gradually eastward across the mountain range. Dr. Samantha Rivera, an anthropologist specializing in folklore and documented phenomena, proposed a controversial theory based on this pattern. She suggested that whatever had influenced the Sullivan family might be migratory, moving through the extensive cave systems beneath the Appalachians on a cycle measured in decades rather than years. This would explain the periodic nature of the disappearances and their geographical progression. The entity, or entities, appear to follow a path that corresponds to the deepest and oldest tunnel networks, Dr. Rivera wrote in her 2010 analysis. These tunnels extend for hundreds of miles through the mountains, far deeper than natural cave formation should allow. Their origin remains unknown, but their age is suggested by indigenous oral traditions that reference those who watch from below and warn against settling near certain cave entrances. Dr. Rivera's research team identified geological formations that might indicate the next location in the pattern, a small community in eastern West Virginia with an extensive cave system nearby. They established monitoring equipment around the cave entrances, including motion sensors, audio recorders, and cameras designed to function in low-light conditions. For 2 years, they documented unusual phenomena in the area. Electronic equipment that malfunctioned without explanation, unexplained sounds recorded deep within the cave system, and local reports of strange dreams among children living nearest to the caves. In 2012, their monitoring captured something unprecedented. A camera positioned near one cave entrance recorded a figure emerging shortly before dawn, a human-shaped form that moved with disturbing fluidity, its limbs bending at angles that suggested additional joints. The image quality was too poor to distinguish facial features, but the proportions of the head appeared elongated in a manner reminiscent of Elijah Sullivan's transformed appearance. The figure moved beyond the camera's range and was not recorded by any of the other monitoring devices in the area. 3 days after this recording, a local child disappeared while playing near the forest edge. Search efforts found no trace of the child, but searchers reported finding geometric symbols freshly carved into trees near where the child was last seen, symbols that matched those documented at Coldwater Creek and other sites of 19th century disappearances. The symbols had not been present the day before, according to forest rangers familiar with the area. The child was never found. In the weeks following the disappearance, 3 more children from the same community reported seeing a person who could fold themselves near the cave entrances. One child produced a drawing showing a figure with an elongated head and too many joints in its limbs, an image that bore striking similarities to the final photograph of Elijah Sullivan, documented in Dr. Barnett's records from 1912. Dr. Rivera's team expanded their monitoring network to include other locations that fit the geographical pattern of previous incidents. They established a database to track reports of unusual phenomena, missing persons, and the appearance of the distinctive geometric symbols throughout the region. Their findings suggested that the cycle was accelerating. The periods between clusters of incidents were growing shorter, and the geographic range was expanding beyond the historical pattern. Whatever exists beneath the Appalachians appears to be entering a new phase of activity, Dr. Rivera concluded in her 2015 report. The historical record suggests these phases occur approximately every 150 years, with the last major period of activity corresponding to the mid-19th century disappearances that included the Sullivan family. If this pattern holds, we are entering a period of increased interaction between these entities and human communities in the region. The Sullivan family portrait remained central to understanding this phenomenon. As the only clear visual documentation of the transformation process, it provided crucial insight into how these entities might interact with human biology. The progressive changes in Elijah Sullivan's features suggested not a sudden replacement, but a gradual reshaping, as if the child's physical form was being slowly reconfigured according to a different anatomical blueprint. In 2018, genetic analysis of soil samples from the chamber discovered by Dr. Harlow in 1972 yielded unexpected results. The unidentified biological structures contained DNA that was partially human in origin, but included sequences that did not match any known species. These sequences appeared to be artificially engineered rather than the result of natural evolution, suggesting a level of biological manipulation far beyond human capability, especially in the 19th century when the samples originated. The evidence increasingly suggests that these entities possess advanced knowledge of genetic modification, wrote Dr. Catherine Zhao, the geneticist who analyzed the samples. The DNA structures indicate a deliberate hybridization process, combining human genetic material with something entirely unknown to current science. The purpose of such hybridization remains unclear, but the Sullivan case and similar disappearances suggest these entities may be creating intermediaries that can move between their world and ours. This hypothesis was supported by historical patterns documented across Appalachia. In many communities where disappearances occurred, local records mentioned strangers who arrived shortly before residents began to vanish, individuals who resembled humans but spoke oddly and moved in ways that witnesses described as unnatural. These accounts paralleled Dr. Barnett's grandfather's notes about visitors who came to Coldwater Creek asking about Elijah Sullivan before the town was abandoned. The implication was disturbing. The entities beneath the mountains might be creating human-like proxies to observe and interact with surface communities, possibly to identify children or adults suitable for further transformation. Elijah Sullivan may have been one such candidate, selected for reasons unknown and gradually altered to serve some purpose in the entity's incomprehensible agenda. In September 2022, hikers exploring an unmapped section of forest near the original Coldwater Creek settlement discovered a hidden entrance to a cave system that had not been documented in any geological survey. The entrance had been concealed behind a rock formation that appeared to have been recently shifted, revealing a narrow passage that descended steeply into the mountain. The hikers reported their discovery to local authorities but did not enter the cave themselves, deterred by the unnatural cold that emanated from the opening and the complete absence of wildlife in the vicinity. A team of speleologists from West Virginia University investigated the site the following month. Their preliminary exploration revealed a cave system unlike any previously documented in the region. The tunnels did not follow natural geological formations, but instead had been created through some unknown process that left the rock walls smooth and precisely shaped. The geometric symbols familiar from other sites were present throughout, carved with mathematical precision and arranged in patterns that suggested a form of written language. Most significant was what the team discovered approximately 200 feet below the entrance. A chamber containing preserved human clothing dating from various periods, 19th century garments matching the era of the Sullivan family, early 20th century items, and modern clothing that appeared to have been discarded recently. All showed signs of having been carefully removed rather than torn or damaged. They had been arranged in concentric circles around a central area where the floor of the chamber had been modified into a shape resembling a shallow pool, though no water was present. DNA analysis of material found on these garments revealed human genetic markers from multiple individuals, some dating back to the 19th century based on degradation patterns. More disturbing was the presence of the same unknown genetic structures previously identified in the samples from Dr. Harlow's 1972 discovery. These structures were more prevalent in the modern clothing, suggesting increased activity in recent years. The exploration team planned to return with additional equipment to document the deeper sections of the cave system, but before this could occur, a series of minor earthquakes struck the region. When researchers returned to the site, they found the entrance completely sealed by a rockfall that seismic data indicated was not consistent with natural earthquake damage. The precision of the collapse suggested deliberate action to prevent further exploration. In the weeks following this discovery, residents of nearby communities reported unusual dreams in which they felt compelled to walk toward the mountains at night. Several described seeing figures at the edge of the forest, tall, angular silhouettes that moved with unsettling fluidity and disappeared when approached directly. Local children began producing drawings showing elongated human-like figures with too many joints in their limbs, reminiscent of the historical descriptions of transformed individuals like Elijah Sullivan. Dr. Rivera's research team documented these reports and identified a pattern consistent with historical accounts preceding disappearances in the 19th century. They established monitoring systems throughout the area and coordinated with local authorities to implement safety measures, particularly for children who appeared to be most susceptible to whatever influence was emanating from beneath the mountain. In January 2023, their monitoring equipment captured something unprecedented, a series of low-frequency sound patterns originating from deep within the sealed cave system. These sounds were inaudible to human ears, but registered clearly on specialized equipment. Analysis revealed that they followed mathematical patterns identical to those formed by the geometric symbols found throughout the cave networks. The sounds continued for exactly 7 hours and 23 minutes before ceasing completely. That same night, monitoring cameras positioned near the forest edge recorded multiple figures moving among the trees, human-like forms that exhibited the now familiar characteristics of elongated proportions and unnatural joint movement. Unlike previous recordings, these images were clear enough to distinguish facial features. The figures had recognizably human faces that appeared to be in various stages of transformation, some showing only subtle distortions, others exhibiting the extreme elongation and restructuring seen in the final photograph of Elijah Sullivan. Most disturbing was the recognition of one particular face, a child who had disappeared from a neighboring community in 2012, now showing advanced signs of the transformation process. The child's features were still recognizable, but had been altered in ways that matched the progression documented in Ezekiel Sullivan's wall of portraits from 1863. This provided the first concrete evidence that the phenomenon continued into the present day and followed the same pattern established over 150 years earlier. The Sullivan family portrait had become more than a historical curiosity or a mysterious anomaly. It was now understood as documentation of an ongoing process, one that connected the disappearances of the 19th century to current events. The distortions in Elijah's face represented not an endpoint, but a stage in a transformation that continued to affect individuals throughout the region, guided by entities whose purpose and origin remained beyond human comprehension. In March 2023, Dr. Rivera published her comprehensive analysis of the Sullivan case and its connection to the broader pattern of Appalachian disappearances. She proposed that the entities beneath the mountains were engaged in a long-term project of observation and selective transformation, studying human communities over centuries and occasionally selecting individuals for purposes unknown. The accelerating pattern of activity suggested that this project might be entering a new phase, one with potentially significant implications for communities throughout the region. The Sullivan family portrait serves as both warning and evidence, Dr. Rivera concluded. It captures a moment in an ongoing process that has shaped the hidden history of Appalachia for generations. Whatever exists beneath the mountains has been watching us far longer than we have been watching it. The distortion in Elijah Sullivan's face is not a photographic anomaly or a genetic abnormality. It is documentation of a human being in the process of becoming something else, transformed by entities whose nature and purpose we are only beginning to comprehend. The original daguerreotype remains in the National Archive of Folk History, its significance now recognized by researchers studying the phenomenon. To most visitors, it appears simply as an old family portrait, notable perhaps for the stern expression of the father and the solemn faces of his sons. But for those who know what to look for, those who understand the history of Coldwater Creek and the pattern of disappearances that continues to this day, the subtle wrongness of the youngest boy's face reveals something far more disturbing. evidence of an intelligence that has been observing humanity from beneath the mountains, selecting certain individuals for transformation, and patiently executing a plan that unfolds not in years or decades, but in centuries. And in small communities throughout Appalachia, children still occasionally report seeing figures at the edge of the forest, tall, angular silhouettes that move with unsettling fluidity and seem to watch with particular interest when the children are alone. Some of these children later describe dreams of caves and tunnels, of voices that speak from the darkness below, promising to show them how to change. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and like this video. If you know someone who enjoys true historical mysteries with a touch of the unexplained, share this with them. They'll thank you for introducing them to these forgotten chapters of American history.